How do you handle the people who are supposed to love you when they treat your home like a battlefield and your newborn like a trophy in a game of psychological dominance? We thought we could survive them. We thought we could gamify the trauma just to make it through the week without our marriage imploding. We made a bingo board, a literal grid of their worst behaviors, thinking it would take 7 days to fill. They finished the entire board in less than 72 hours, and by the time the last box was crossed off, the game wasn't funny anymore. It was a nightmare we couldn't wake up from. To understand how we got to the point of tracking backhanded compliments and gaslighting on a printed sheet of paper, you have to understand the ghosts that live in my husband's eyes. My husband, let's call him David, is 31 years old, but sometimes, when his parents are around, I see the scared 10-year-old boy he used to be. He grew up in the kind of household that Child Protective Services uses for training manuals. It wasn't just strict or old-fashioned. It was a calculated, narcissistic environment where affection was a currency and silence was the only safety. His parents are the architects of his deepest insecurities. Two people who look at their children not as human beings, but as extensions of their own egos. I'm 30, and I'm currently 6 weeks postpartum. If you've ever been there, you know that 6 weeks is a fragile, raw place to be. Your body is still healing, your hormones are a crashing tide, and your maternal instincts are dialed up to a level of intensity that feels almost vibrational. You are a raw nerve. We knew having visitors would be hard, but we wanted to be fair. We wanted David's parents to meet their grandchild. We wanted to believe, perhaps naively, that the birth of a new generation might soften the jagged edges of the old one. We were so wrong. The dread started months before they even touched down. My mother-in-law, let's call her Eleanor, has always viewed me as a rival rather than a daughter-in-law. It's that classic, suffocating enmeshment. She doesn't want David to be a man, she wants him to be her emotional support animal. When I was 8 months pregnant, struggling to breathe and feeling like my body wasn't my own, she looked me up and down and told me I looked unusually large, and not in the miracle of life way. At our wedding, she showed up in a dress so white it practically glowed, a silent scream for attention on a day that was supposed to be ours. She's even gone so far as to try and secretly arrange for our baby to be baptized behind our backs, as if our parenting choices were just minor inconveniences she could bypass. But the most chilling part was the vaccines. We had one rule. If you want to hold a newborn with no immune system, you need to be up to date on your shots. Eleanor looked us in the eye and lied. She said she was all set. It wasn't until I asked for the actual paperwork, that new mum intuition kicking in, that she folded. She hadn't gotten them. She was willing to risk her granddaughter's life just to avoid a minor inconvenience and a moment of honesty. So, when the day of their arrival finally came, David and I were already exhausted. We sat on the couch the night before they landed, the baby sleeping fitfully in the bassinet between us. The house felt like a fortress we were about to lose. How are we going to do this? David asked, his voice low and heavy. 1 week, 7 days. I don't know if I can keep my cool for 7 days. That's when the idea for the bingo board was born. It started as a joke, a way to vent the steam. We grabbed a piece of paper and drew a 5x5 grid. Okay, I said, pen hovering over the paper. What's the first square? Critiques your cooking, David said immediately. That's a freebie. My dad will do that before he even takes his coat off. Issues backhanded compliment, I added. Kisses the baby after being told not to. Comments on body image. Gaslights feelings. We filled the squares with the predictable patterns of their toxicity. That's not what I meant. Undermines parenting. Complains about being bored. We even had a square for strong smell, because for some reason, his parents carry this specific, overwhelming scent, like mung beans mixed with pennies soaked in stagnant water. It's a metallic, earthy funk that clings to the curtains and stays in the carpet long after they leave. We laughed while we made it. It was our shield. If they were mean, it wasn't a personal attack anymore. It was just a mark on the board. We told ourselves that if we got a bingo, we'd treat ourselves to something special. We had no idea that the prize for a full board would be the complete collapse of our hospitality. The invasion, as we came to call it, began the moment the rental car pulled into the driveway. I was in the kitchen, nursing the baby, feeling that familiar pang of postpartum anxiety tightening my chest. David went to the door. I heard the voices first. Eleanor's high-pitched, performative trill and his father's low, grumbling tone. They didn't come in and ask how I was feeling. They didn't ask how the birth went. They walked in like they were inspecting a hotel that was beneath their standards. I had spent the morning putting fresh, crisp sheets on the bed in the baby's room, which we had converted into a temporary guest suite. I wanted them to feel welcome. I wanted to be the bigger person. Within 10 minutes, Eleanor walked into the kitchen, wrinkling her nose. "The sheets," she said, not even looking at the baby yet. "They're smelly and frumpy. I can't sleep on those." I felt the heat rise in my neck. "They're brand new, Eleanor. I just washed them this morning." "Well, they don't feel right. They're cheap," she sighed, playing the victim of my poor housekeeping. I offered to give her a different set, even showed her where the linen closet was so she could choose her own. She looked at the new sheets, waved a hand dismissively, and said, "No, I don't need those now. I'll just suffer through." Square one. Complains about sleeping situation. Checked. Square two came at dinner. David is an incredible cook. It's one of the ways he heals, by creating the nourishing, beautiful meals he never had as a kid. He spent 3 hours making a 3-course dinner. He wanted to impress them, that deep-seated need for parental approval still flickering in his heart. We sat down, the steam rising from the plates. They ate in total, suffocating silence. The only sound was the clink of silverware. David finally broke. "So, how is it?" he asked, his voice hopeful. His father leaned back, wiped his mouth, and began a point-by-point critique of everything that was wrong. The meat was a minute over. The sauce was too acidic. The portions were pretentious. It wasn't a conversation, it was a deposition. Square. Critiques cooking. Checked. As the first night bled into the second day, the atmosphere in the house shifted from uncomfortable to toxic. The smell began to permeate the guest room, that penny and bean odour that made my postpartum nausea roar back to life. But it wasn't just the smell. It was the way they moved through our space. They used appliances without asking, leaving messes for me to clean up while I was literally holding a crying infant. They ignored every boundary we set. But the real breaking point, the moment the bingo board stopped being a joke and started being a record of a crime, was the baby. When you bring a newborn home, your entire universe shrinks down to the size of their tiny, fragile lungs. Every breath they take is a miracle, and every germ that enters your house feels like a mortal threat. We had laid down the law long before their flight touched the tarmac. Absolutely no kissing the baby. None. I didn't care if they thought we were being paranoid first-time parents. Between RSV, flu season, and the very real dangers of cold sores for a 6-week-old infant, it was a non-negotiable rule. Do not put your mouth on my child. But for someone like Eleanor, a boundary isn't a rule to be respected. It's a challenge to be conquered. It started small. We were in the living room, the baby kicking happily on her playmat. Eleanor was hovering, her presence a heavy, suffocating cloud. Suddenly, she swooped down, her face zeroing in on my daughter's bare little toes. She pursed her lips, fully intending to press them right against the baby's skin. "Eleanor, no!" David snapped, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. He physically stepped between his mother and our daughter. "We told you, no kissing." She stood up, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated offense. She didn't apologize. She didn't say she forgot. Instead, she crossed her arms, thrust her chin out, and spent the next 3 hours stomping around the house, sighing loudly, and refusing to make eye contact with either of us. She acted as though we had just slapped her across the face. I walked into the kitchen, pulled out the folded piece of paper from my pocket, and pressed a heavy black X through the box that read, "Sulks when corrected." But the punishment for correcting her was just beginning. Since David's painstakingly prepared 3-course meal had been deemed inadequate the night before, Eleanor and his father announced that they wanted to order takeout. Not just any takeout, mind you. They wanted a specific, high-end restaurant from downtown. They sat on our couch, scrolling through the delivery app on David's phone, tapping away with casual arrogance. They added appetizers, premium entrees, extra sides, and desserts. The total climbed higher and higher, well over $100. When it was time to hit checkout, his father suddenly patted his pockets with an exaggerated look of confusion. "Oh, shoot," he muttered, turning to David with a fake sheepish grin. "I don't have my wallet on me. We don't have any money set up on our phones. You're going to have to get this one, son." It wasn't an accident. You don't fly across the country, demand expensive takeout, load up a digital cart, and suddenly realize you don't have a single credit card. It was a calculated move. It was the same financial manipulation they had used to control David his entire life. They wanted us to foot the bill because, in their minds, our home, our money, and our time belonged to them. David looked at me, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. He paid for the food. We ate in silence again. After dinner, I checked off. Makes a financial ask. By day 3, the physical exhaustion of postpartum recovery was colliding violently with the psychological drain of hosting them. I was running on maybe 2 hours of sleep a night. My body still ached. I was bleeding, wearing mesh underwear, and navigating the incredibly difficult, tear-filled journey of establishing a breastfeeding routine. I needed peace. I needed to sit on my couch in sweatpants and just survive the day. Instead, Eleanor cornered me in the hallway. "I'm bored," she announced, leaning against the doorframe, her arms crossed. I blinked at her, trying to process the sheer absurdity of the statement. "Bored?" "Yes," she sighed, waving a hand dismissively at our home. "We're just sitting around. I want to go out. I was looking online and there are some gorgeous vineyards about an hour from here. We should go wine tasting. Or maybe hit the downtown boutiques, do some shopping, be tourists." I stared at her, utterly speechless. I had pushed a human being out of my body 6 weeks ago. I couldn't sit in a car for an hour without excruciating pain, let alone walk around a vineyard drinking Pinot Noir while my newborn needed to be nursed every 2 hours. She didn't see me as a recovering mother. She saw me as a cruise director who was failing to entertain her. "Eleanor," I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could, "I am 6 weeks postpartum. I'm not going wine tasting." "Well, then what are we supposed to do?" she whined, her tone dripping with passive-aggressive disappointment. "I didn't fly all the way out here just to stare at the walls." I walked back to our bedroom, closed the door, and checked off 2 more boxes. Complains about being bored, and pressures for outing/trip. The board was filling up entirely too fast, and the humour we thought it would provide was completely gone. We were trapped in our own home, with 2 adults who possessed the emotional regulation of toddlers. But the most unforgivable moment, the moment that truly exposed the darkest parts of her narcissistic mind, happened later that afternoon. The baby was unusually fussy. She had been crying for 20 minutes, her little face red, her knees pulled up to her chest. If you've ever dealt with a colicky or gassy newborn, you know that the sound of that cry activates every panic receptor in your brain. I was holding her against my shoulder, gently patting her back, swaying, doing everything in my power to soothe her. Eleanor marched into the nursery. She didn't ask how she could help. She didn't offer a kind word. She stood over me, her eyes narrowing as she watched me pat the baby's back. "You're not doing it right," she declared. "She's just a little gassy," I said softly, trying to focus on my daughter. "She'll burp in a minute." "No," Eleanor insisted, her voice rising, taking on a sharp, accusatory edge. "You are not hitting her hard enough. You're hurting her by not burping her right." I froze. My hand stopped mid-pat. "You're hurting the baby," she repeated, stepping closer, pointing a manicured finger at me. "This is a sign of a bad mother. You are being a bad mother." The room went completely silent except for the baby's cries. My heart hammered against my ribs. A bad mother. Those words are the ultimate weapon against a postpartum woman. They are the exact manifestation of every dark, terrifying insecurity that whispers to you at 3 a.m. when you feel like you're failing. And she knew that. She weaponized it deliberately. She didn't actually believe I was hurting my child. This was her narrative. This was her twisted, calculated plan. She needed to break me down. She needed to point out every perceived flaw, every tiny mistake, to prove that I was incompetent. Because if I was a bad mother, then she had a reason to swoop in. She had literally been telling David for months that she was willing to quit her job, move into our house, and help raise the baby. She didn't want to help. She wanted a do-over baby. She wanted to push me out of the picture entirely and take control of our family. I looked at her, my vision blurring with a mixture of rage and sheer exhaustion. Undermines parenting, gaslights feelings, plays the victim, issues backhanded compliment. The bingo board was nearly full. But the worst, the absolute breaking point was yet to come. Because Eleanor wasn't finished. She was about to cross the final, most sacred boundary we had set, and she was going to look me right in the eye while she did it. The air in that nursery was thick, heavy with the metallic penny and bean smell that followed them like a shadow. My daughter's crying had reached a crescendo, a high, piercing sound that set my nerves on fire. I was exhausted, physically depleted, and emotionally raw. When Eleanor made that comment about me being a bad mother, something shifted in me. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was a cold, hard clarity. I realized then that she wasn't here to support us. She was here to dismantle us. She stood there, her posture rigid, her face set in that infuriating, self-righteous mask. She was waiting for me to break. She wanted me to snap, to yell, to give her the ammunition she needed to play the victim and paint herself as the poor, mistreated grandmother. But I didn't give her the satisfaction. I turned my back to her, shifted the baby, and started rubbing her back in long, slow circles, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I have this handled, Eleanor," I said, my voice barely a whisper, though it felt like a shout in the small room. She didn't leave. She stood there, watching me, her gaze lingering on the baby with a hunger that made my skin crawl. It wasn't the look of a grandmother adoring her grandchild. It was the look of someone eyeing a prize they felt they were being unjustly denied. "You're just so tired," she said, her voice dripping with artificial saccharine sweetness. It was the gaslighting box, checked and double-checked. It's hard, isn't it, when you're not prepared, when you don't really know how to take care of a child. I'm just here to help, dear. I could take her for a while. You should go shower. You look quite pale. I felt the urge to scream, but instead I just walked past her, shielding the baby with my body. I walked straight into the living room where David was folding laundry. He looked up, his face pale, his eyes searching mine. He knew. He had heard the tension, the cutting tone of his mother's voice. He knew exactly what she was trying to do. "We need to talk," I said, my voice trembling. We retreated to our bedroom, the only place that felt remotely like a sanctuary. I sat on the edge of the bed, the baby finally calming down in my arms. David sat next to me, his shoulders slumped. He looked like a man who was drowning. "She called me a bad mother," I said, the words catching in my throat. "She told me I was hurting the baby. David, I can't do this. I cannot have her in this house for another 4 days." David put his head in his hands. I saw the struggle playing out in his expression, the battle between the man he had become and the boy who was terrified of his mother's disapproval. He had spent years in therapy, years building his own life, but there is a special kind of trauma that comes from realizing your parents will never change. It's a mourning process. It's grieving for the parents you deserved but never got. "I know," he whispered. "I heard her. She's been doing it since the moment they walked in. The bingo board. It's not even a joke anymore. It's a record of abuse. It's a tally of the ways they are trying to break us." He stood up, pacing the small room. He looked at the bingo board we had left on the nightstand. It was nearly full. Kisses the baby was the only one left. And, as if on cue, the bedroom door creaked open. Eleanor stood there, her eyes darting around the room, completely ignoring the fact that we were clearly having a private moment. She walked in, her heels clicking against the floorboards, and headed straight for the bassinet where I had just laid the baby down. "Oh, she's so precious," Eleanor cooed, leaning down until her face was inches from the baby's. "Eleanor, step back," David said, his voice cold, steady, and devoid of the fear he used to carry. She froze. She looked at David, then at me. She knew we were at a breaking point. She knew the tension in the room was electric. And that was exactly why she did it. She wanted to test the power dynamic. She wanted to see if she could win. She looked me dead in the eye. A smirk played on her lips, a thin, cruel line. The silence that followed was absolute. It felt like the walls of the house were pressing in on us. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stood up, walked over to her, and pointed to the door. "Get out," I said. My voice was eerily calm. "Get out of my room. Get out of my house." She looked shocked for a split second, her eyes widening. She tried to pivot, to play the victim, to start the "that's not what I meant" speech. "I was just showing affection. You people are so sensitive. You're ruining this visit." "You are not a guest," David said, stepping in, his voice booming. "You are an intruder. You have ignored every boundary we set. You have insulted my wife. You have disrespected our home. And you have put our daughter at risk. You are finished." He grabbed their suitcases, which were already mostly packed from their earlier, sulking phase, and marched them into the hallway. "You're leaving," he said. "You're going to a hotel. You can stay in this city for the rest of your trip if you want, but you are not staying in our house for 1 more minute." They tried to fight it. They tried to bargain, to argue, to play the "we're your parents" card. But David didn't blink. He stood there, the man he had fought so hard to become, finally standing tall against the people who tried to keep him small. When the door finally clicked shut behind them, the silence in the house didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt clean. It felt like someone had opened a window and let the stale, metallic mung bean and penny air escape, replaced by the cool, fresh breeze of a home that was finally, truly ours again. I sank down onto the floor, the baby in my arms, and let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for my entire pregnancy. The bingo board lay on the floor near the door. Every single box had been checked. We had won the game, but the cost had been higher than I ever imagined. The silence that followed their departure wasn't just quiet, it was deafening. It was the kind of silence that rings in your ears after a long, sustained scream. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the air in our home didn't taste like stale, metallic misery. It tasted like freedom. I sat on the floor of our living room, the baby still tucked securely against my chest, and I just watched the front door. I expected them to burst back in, to pound on the wood, to start screaming through the glass panels. But there was nothing. David walked over and sat down beside me, pulling both of us into his arms. He didn't say a word for a long time. He just leaned his head against mine, his chest rising and falling in deep, measured breaths. I could feel the tension draining out of him, leaving behind a sort of hollow, aching exhaustion. "They're actually gone," he whispered, his voice cracking. "They're gone," I echoed. The bingo board was still lying there on the hardwood floor, a testament to the absolute madness we had just endured. Every single box, the gaslights, the triangulation, the undermines parenting, all crossed out in aggressive dark ink. It was a physical map of our trauma, now relegated to a piece of paper that meant absolutely nothing. But as the adrenaline began to fade, the reality of what had just happened settled over me like a heavy, cold blanket. It wasn't just that they had left. It was that they had forced us to kick them out. They had pushed David, their own son, to the absolute brink of his sanity, to the point where he had to choose between his childhood conditioning and his own family. And he had chosen us. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his eyes welling up. "I'm so sorry you had to go through this. I'm sorry I ever thought they were capable of being the people I wanted them to be. I wanted them to be grandparents, not this." "You don't have to apologize for them," I said, rubbing his back. "You can't control them, David. You only control how much access they have to our lives. And today, you closed the door." That night we slept in shifts. We kept the doors locked, the lights dimmed, and the baby safe in her bassinet. We didn't talk about them anymore. We didn't dissect what they said or why they said it. For the first time in my postpartum journey, I didn't feel like I was under surveillance. I felt like a mother in her own home. The next morning, we woke up to a flurry of notifications on our phones. It was the typical narcissistic fallout. Long, rambling texts from Eleanor about how she was disowned, how we were cruel and ungrateful, how she had only ever wanted to help. She sent photos of herself and David's father at a local, expensive hotel, looking mournful and pained, trying to paint themselves as the victims of an irrational couple. David read them, his face impassive. He didn't reply. He didn't defend himself. He didn't try to explain, because he knew that explanation is just another word for manipulation in their language. He simply blocked their numbers. "Is this it?" I asked, watching him set his phone down. "Is this the end?" "For this trip it is," he said, turning to me with a look of profound, quiet resolve. "And for a while after that, maybe for a long while." I realised something while I was walking them out the door. I realised that I've spent my entire life trying to earn a version of them that doesn't exist. I was chasing a ghost. And if I keep chasing that ghost, I'm going to lose the two people who actually matter. He reached out and took my hand. "I need to talk to someone, professionally. A therapist who knows what this is, who knows what CPTSD is. Not someone who tells me to forgive and forget, or they're just your parents. I need to dismantle this part of myself so I don't ever put you or our daughter in that position again." I felt a surge of pride so intense it almost brought me to tears. This was the man I married. This was the father our daughter deserved. The rest of the week was quiet. It was the best, most beautiful kind of quiet. We spent our days doing me moments, long, luxurious showers where I could finally breathe without feeling like I was being watched. We ate simple, warm, nourishing food. We spent hours just looking at our daughter, marveling at how peaceful she was when she wasn't being treated like a prop in a toxic drama. But there was still a lingering sense of sadness. It's hard to talk about, especially when you're the one who set the boundary. People often think that cutting off toxic family is a moment of pure cinematic triumph, but it's actually a grieving process. You're not just losing the people they are, you're losing the fantasy of who you wanted them to be. You're mourning the fact that for some people, blood is not thicker than water. Sometimes, blood is just a toxic substance that you have to drain away to survive. As the week wound down, I started to think about all the other families out there. All the women sitting in their nurseries right now, feeling the same bad mother whispers creeping into their minds, wondering if they're crazy for wanting to set a boundary, wondering if they're being too sensitive or too cruel. I thought about the bingo board. It was a silly, desperate, human way of trying to make sense of the nonsensical. It was our way of laughing so we wouldn't cry. But what if we didn't have to wait for a bingo board to be filled? What if we understood that the game is rigged the moment they step into our space? "What do you think, David?" I asked him, looking at the empty space where his parents had been standing just days before. "Do you regret it? The bingo board, the kicking them out?" He looked at me, a soft, tired smile on his face. "I regret that I waited this long. I regret that I let them think they had a seat at our table. But I don't regret the silence. I think the silence is the best gift we could have given our daughter." It was a powerful realization. Our daughter would never grow up watching her mother be belittled. She would never see her father being treated like a child in his own home. She would grow up in a house built on mutual respect and genuine, unconditional love. That was the legacy we were starting to build. And I realized something else too. By sharing this, by being open about the messiness of our marriage and the ugliness of the situation, we were breaking the cycle of secrecy. Abuse thrives in the dark. It thrives in the "we don't talk about that" family culture. By bringing it into the light, by talking about the mung bean and penny smell and the backhanded compliments, we were taking the power away from them. The days following their departure felt like the decompression of a deep-sea diver surfacing too quickly. Every morning, I woke up waiting for the knock at the door, for the sound of Eleanor's voice critiquing the way I folded the laundry or the temperature of the nursery. But the silence held. The house remained ours, a space where we weren't performers in someone else's sick production. We started a new routine, one built on the wreckage of the old one. Every time a pang of guilt flared up, the kind that makes you question if you were too harsh or if you should have just let them stay, David and I would look at each other and simply say, "The baby is safe." That was the anchor. It wasn't about us anymore. It was about creating a buffer, a sacred space where no one could whisper, "You're a bad mother," into the ears of someone just trying to survive the 4th trimester. I found myself reflecting a lot on the bingo board. It was a funny, dark, pathetic little thing. But in hindsight, it was also a survival tool. It forced us to treat their abuse as a data point rather than a personal failure. By marking off gaslights feelings or critiques housekeeping, we were distancing ourselves from the toxicity. We were turning them into characters in a game we could control, instead of being the targets of a game they controlled. I wonder if more people realized that their in-laws' behavior wasn't a reflection of their own worth, but a predictable, repetitive script, would they be able to protect themselves sooner? I started reading through the comments from people who had read our story. The outpouring of support was overwhelming. I saw thousands of stories from other parents, other spouses, other children of narcissistic parents, all echoing the same pain. I felt crazy until I read this. I thought I was the only one who felt like I was losing my mind. It's a tragedy that so many of us are living through the same script, terrified of the same repercussions. But I also saw the questions. Is it too cruel? Are you sure you couldn't have handled it better? My answer now is simple. There is no polite way to be abused. There is no correct way to handle someone who views your boundaries as an insult to their existence. If you are ever in this position, if you are 6 weeks postpartum or 30 years old or 60, and you feel the weight of someone else's expectations crushing the life out of your home, don't wait for a bingo board to be filled. Don't wait for the final insult. Your peace of mind is not a negotiation. It is a birthright. The hardest part of this entire journey wasn't the screaming matches or the hotel bills. It was the realization that I had married a man who had been taught that his love had to be earned through submission. Watching David shift from that terrified, people-pleasing boy into a man who could stand at the front door and tell his own parents, "You are not welcome here," was the most beautiful and painful transformation I've ever witnessed. It was like watching a prisoner walk out of a cell he hadn't realized was unlocked. We didn't just kick them out, we kicked out the ghosts. We kicked out the fear that if we were bad, we would be abandoned. We kicked out the idea that family is a mandate rather than a choice. And in their place, we built something real. I'm standing in the kitchen now, the sunlight streaming in through the window, and I'm making breakfast. It's not a 3-course meal, and it's not designed to impress anyone. It's just toast and coffee. The baby is asleep in the other room, not because I'm burping her right to satisfy an audience, but because she's safe and loved and content. If you're listening to this and you're struggling with your own in-law invasion, whether it's a physical guest or just a constant critical voice in your head, I want you to think about what you need. Not what your parents expect, not what society says good daughters-in-law do, but what you actually need to be the person and parent you want to be. Ask yourself, if there were no consequences for setting a boundary, what would you say? Because the truth is, the consequences you fear are almost never as bad as the cost of silence. It's been a long road, and I know there will be more bumps. There will be holidays, there will be birthdays, and there will be moments where they try to force their way back into the narrative. But we have a foundation now. We have the bingo board, a literal map of their patterns, to remind us that we aren't crazy, we aren't too sensitive, and we aren't the ones in the wrong. I'm curious, what would you have done in our shoes? Would you have held out until the end of the week? Or would you have drawn the line the moment the first boundary was crossed? Would you have felt the same guilt we did? Or do you have a stronger internal compass for these things? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you've ever had to set a hard boundary with someone you were supposed to love, please know that you aren't alone. There's a community of us out here who have had to choose ourselves. And it's okay to acknowledge how hard that choice is. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to protect your own peace from the people who were supposed to cherish it, consider subscribing. We're building a space here where we don't have to hide the ugly parts of our relationships, because that's the only way to heal. We're still healing. David is starting his new therapy sessions next week, and I'm finally starting to feel like myself again. Not just a vessel for a baby or a target for a narcissist, but a person, a mother, a wife. The house is quiet, but it's a good quiet. It's the sound of a life that belongs only to us. And honestly, that's the only prize I ever really wanted. The dust has finally settled. If you were to walk into our house today, you wouldn't see the tension that hung in the air like a physical weight just a few weeks ago. You wouldn't hear the constant, low-level hum of anxiety that used to follow us from room to room. You would just hear the steady, rhythmic sound of a life being lived on our own terms. My daughter is growing. Her eyes are tracking movement with more focus, and she's beginning to make these tiny, sweet, gurgling sounds that seem to vibrate right through my chest. Every time she smiles, truly smiles, not just those early gas-induced grins, I am reminded of why we had to do what we did. We didn't kick out family. We protected a miracle. But I'll be honest, there are still moments where the ghost of the situation creeps back in. Sometimes, when the house is quiet and the sun is dipping below the horizon, painting the living room in those long, amber shadows, I look at the spot where Eleanor used to stand. I can still hear the phantom echo of her voice, that sharp, condescending tone that made me question my own worth as a mother. For a split second, I'll feel that familiar prickle of, am I being too harsh? Or, could I have been more patient? That's the thing about gaslighting and emotional abuse. It doesn't just stop when the person leaves your house. It leaves a residue. It's like mud tracked into your home. You can sweep it out, you can scrub the floors, but for a while, you still feel like you're walking on grit. David is doing the hard work. I see him every day, sitting on the balcony or in the study, talking to his new therapist. I hear the muffled tones of his voice, sometimes steady, sometimes shaking, as he unpacks years of baggage. He's learning that the fear he felt, the fear that if he didn't please them, he would be unloved, was a lie he was told when he was too small to know any better. He's realizing that unconditional love isn't something you perform, it's something you exist in. I've been thinking a lot about the concept of the bingo board. It was a silly, desperate attempt to turn a horror movie into a comedy, and in a way, it worked. It gave us the distance we needed to see them for what they actually were. Predictable. Every move they made was from a playbook. The in-law invasion wasn't a unique tragedy. It was a script they had performed 1,000 times before. And once you see the script, you stop being an actor and you start being the audience. You realize you don't have to participate in the play. There's a part of me that wonders what the next few months will bring. Holidays are coming up, birthdays, milestones. There will be attempts at hoovering, that classic move where they pretend nothing happened, offer a fake apology, or try to guilt trip us into opening the door again. But we're family, they'll say. Don't you want your daughter to know her grandparents? When those moments come, and I know they will, I won't be scrambling for a pen and a piece of paper to make a game out of it. We won't need to track the backhanded compliments or the financial asks anymore. We already know who they are. We've seen the full board. We've checked every box. There's no mystery left to solve. The only answer left is no. It's empowering in a strange, bittersweet way. To reach a point where you stop hoping for a miracle from people who are incapable of giving it to you is a kind of liberation. It's the death of a hope, yes, but it's the birth of a reality. And the reality we have now, the reality of a quiet home, a healthy baby, and a husband who finally has my back, is infinitely better than the fantasy we were clinging to before. If you are currently sitting in your home, reading this while your in-laws are in the next room, or perhaps you're dreading a visit that's on the calendar for next month, please hear me. You are not a bad person for wanting to protect your peace. You are not a difficult daughter-in-law for insisting on boundaries. You are a parent. Your job is to be the wall between your child and the world, and that includes the parts of the world that look like family but act like enemies. Don't wait until your bingo board is full. Don't wait until your marriage is hanging by a thread. Don't wait until you're staring at your child and wondering why you allowed someone to make you feel like you were failing them. If the gut check tells you something is wrong, listen to it. It's the most powerful tool you have. We're going to take this one day at a time. We're going to keep building our own traditions, our own quiet moments, and our own version of family. And to anyone else out there who is fighting for their own space, their own dignity, and their own truth, keep going. It gets better. The silence might feel strange at first, but it's the sound of you finding your own voice. And trust me, it's a voice worth hearing. We're finally at a place where we can look at the future without dread. And for the first time, when I look at my daughter, I don't see a child I need to defend from the people who should be protecting her. I see a child I am free to just love. And that, more than anything, is worth every single bridge we had to burn to get here. The days have a new cadence now, a rhythm that doesn't feel like walking on eggshells. When the sun hits the nursery window in the morning, I don't feel that familiar, sharp anxiety in my chest. I don't check my phone every 5 minutes to see if there's a new, frantic or passive-aggressive message from Eleanor. I don't wake up wondering if I'm going to be told my parenting is subpar or if my home is frumpy. I wake up to the quiet, profound reality of our own lives. People often ask us, well, the few close friends we've let in on this, if we feel guilty. And that's a loaded question. Is it guilt? Or is it the lingering echo of years of indoctrination? My husband David is doing the hard, grinding work of therapy, and he's realized that the guilt he felt was actually just fear. It was the fear of a small child who was told that if he wasn't perfect, if he didn't cater to their whims, he would be abandoned. But he's not a child anymore. He's a protector. He's a husband. He's a father. And that small boy inside him is finally starting to feel safe in the fortress we've built. We talk about the bingo board sometimes, usually with a dark, ironic laugh. It's sitting in a drawer now, that little grid of paper. It's a relic, a souvenir from a war we didn't start but were forced to finish. Looking back, it's so clear. They weren't just being difficult or old-fashioned. They were conducting an audit of our boundaries to see exactly where the weak points were. They were testing the perimeter, like soldiers in a siege, looking for the one gap they could crawl through to gain total control. And the moment we realized that, the moment we stopped viewing them as family and started viewing them as invaders, the power dynamic shifted forever. I think about the mung bean and penny smell. It sounds so trivial when you say it out loud, doesn't it? But that sensory detail is tied to the memory of our home being violated. It's a physical reminder that our personal space, the place where we nurse our baby, where we cry over exhaustion, where we build our marriage, was treated like a hotel they didn't have to pay for. Now the house smells like laundry detergent and fresh coffee. It smells like us. It's a small thing, but for someone in the postpartum trenches, it's everything. We've had to make some hard choices about the future. There's no fix for a narcissistic parent. You don't sit them down, explain how their behavior made you feel, and watch them have a light bulb moment. That's a fantasy. That's what David was chasing for 30 years. But we've accepted the truth. They are who they are. And because they are who they are, we have to be who we are. People who stand firm. People who prioritize the mental health of our household over the archaic blood is thicker than water trope. I know some of you are going through this right now. I see your messages. I see the stories of people who are being bullied by their in-laws, being told they're bad mothers or disrespectful spouses, all while holding a newborn they're trying to keep safe. If you're reading this and you feel that familiar knot in your stomach, know this: you aren't the problem. The problem is the person who cannot respect the most basic, fundamental boundaries of a new family. You are not cruel for saying no. You are not toxic for ending a visit. You are the guardian of your child's emotional and physical safety. And what about that me moment I was looking for? The one I mentioned in the update? I finally got it. A few days ago, I took a long, hot shower. The kind where you don't listen for the baby monitor because you know your husband is there and he's doing a perfect job and he doesn't need to ask for instructions or permission. I washed off the last of that heavy, toxic feeling. I stood under the water and just cried. Not because I was sad, but because I was relieved. It was a release of all the tension that had built up during those 72 hours of the invasion. When I stepped out, I saw David holding the baby, playing a soft game of peekaboo that was entirely his own. There was no one hovering, no one offering unsolicited, cruel advice, no one trying to take his place. It was just a father and his daughter. And in that moment, I knew we had won. We hadn't won a game of bingo. We had won a life. I'm so grateful to everyone who reached out with their own stories, their advice, and their support. It's easy to feel isolated when you're dealing with family trauma. You feel like you're the only one who has to deal with the backhanded compliments or the gaslighting, but you're not. We're all out here navigating this, trying to heal, trying to raise the next generation to be stronger and more compassionate than the last. If you've stuck with me through this story, if you've felt the weight of those boundaries and the relief of the silence, I want to ask you, what would you have done? Is there a moment in your own life where you stood up for your peace, even when it felt like the world was telling you that you were the bad guy. Share it. Let's keep this conversation going. Let's keep pulling the truth into the light. Because the more we talk about these ugly family dynamics, the less power they have over us. Subscribe if you want to follow along with our journey and keep sharing your experiences. Your voice matters, your boundaries matter, and your peace of mind is worth every single bridge you have to burn. We're still here, we're still standing, and for the first time, we're truly, deeply, finally happy. It's strange how quickly a life can be reclaimed once you stop begging for permission to be happy. Looking back on the wreckage of that week, I'm struck by how much we were willing to sacrifice just to keep the peace. We thought peace meant the absence of conflict. We thought that as long as we smiled, as long as we bit our tongues, as long as we kept the bingo board hidden in a drawer, we were maintaining a functional family unit. But we weren't. We were maintaining a cage. I've had a lot of time to think about the aftermath. The fallout, of course, was exactly what you'd expect from people like Eleanor and her husband. There were the texts, the guilt-tripping phone calls to mutual family members, the poor us, we were just trying to visit our grandchild narrative being spun for anyone who would listen. But here's the thing. When you know the truth, the lies lose their sting. Every time a message arrived trying to rewrite history, I just hit block. It's a small, clinical action, but it feels like hitting a reset button on my own sanity. David, meanwhile, has transformed. I don't mean he's suddenly a different person. He's still the same kind, thoughtful man I fell in love with, but there's a new hardness to his resolve. He stopped waiting for the aha moment from his parents. He stopped waiting for them to apologize, or to see him for who he is, or to validate his life. He's finally accepted that the people who raised him weren't capable of the love he needed, and that's a heavy realization to carry. It's like putting down a suitcase you've been lugging around for 30 years. It's a relief, but it's also a grief. The baby is growing so fast, and every milestone is now ours. We don't have to share her first with people who would only try to claim them as their own. We don't have to worry about her being critiqued or having her personal space violated by someone who thinks their comfort is more important than her safety. She's surrounded by a circle of support that is genuine, respectful, and, most importantly, chosen. There are people who will tell you that family is everything and that you should endure anything for the sake of the bloodline. But those people haven't lived through what we lived through. They haven't felt that cold, invasive, metallic fear of having their home and their child treated like a project to be managed. When you prioritize the people who abuse you over the family you've created, you aren't being loyal. You're just teaching your child that their boundaries don't matter. We refuse to do that. We chose to be the parents our parents couldn't be. If you're sitting in your living room right now, maybe looking at a stack of unread texts from a toxic relative, or wondering if you're the one in the wrong for cutting someone off, I want you to remember our story. Remember that the invasion ended the moment we stopped playing by their rules. It ended when we took back our home. It ended when we realized that our sanity was worth more than their approval. I want to hear from you. What is the one boundary? We're still here, still healing, and still learning what it means to be a family without the shadows of the past looming over us. It's a work in progress, but it's a beautiful, authentic work. And every day it gets a little lighter. Every day the smell of mung beans and pennies fades a little more, replaced by the scent of our own life, our own home, and our own unconditional love. Thank you for listening. Thank you for holding space for our story. It's not a story about how to be a good daughter-in-law or a polite child. It's a story about how to survive, how to heal, and how to finally, after all the noise, find your own quiet. And believe me, that quiet is the best prize of all. The silence in our house has become a melody. It's no longer the heavy, suffocating quiet of people walking on eggshells. It's the peaceful, easy stillness of a home that is finally, truly our own. Sometimes, when the house is dark and the only sound is the soft, rhythmic breathing of our daughter in her nursery, I'll find myself standing in the middle of the living room, just breathing it in. I am finally able to exist in my own space without the mental tally of insults, the constant preparation for an ambush, or the draining, soul-crushing effort of trying to be enough for people who were never designed to be satisfied. We had that bingo board framed, not to hang on the wall, but to keep in our private, lockable desk drawer. It's a piece of history now. It's a physical artifact of the most difficult week of our lives, a map of the battlefield we navigated. Every time I see it, I don't feel the rage I felt when I was crossing those boxes off with a shaking hand. I feel a strange, detached pity. They spent their lives building a kingdom of control and manipulation, only to end up in a hotel room, clutching their resentment, while we were here, building a legacy of actual, unconditional love. David is different now, and I don't say that lightly. The man who stood up to his parents that day, the man who firmly, without wavering, told them they were no longer welcome, is the man I see every single morning. He's more present, he's more confident, he's finally shedding the weight of being the emotional support child for his parents. He's learning that he doesn't exist to serve their ego, and that realization has allowed him to fully, deeply step into the role of being a father. He's not performing parenthood to impress them, he's living it to nurture her. I've spent so much time wondering why we waited so long. Why did we let them stay? Why did we think we could handle a week of their presence? But I've stopped asking that. The truth is, we had to go through that invasion to get to the other side. We had to see the absolute, irredeemable toxicity with our own eyes, the gaslighting, the undermining, the disregard for our daughter's health, to finally kill the hope that they would ever be the grandparents we wanted them to be. You can't leave a burning building until you realize the fire is actually going to consume you. That week was the fire. We're in the aftermath, but it's a beautiful place to be. We're rebuilding our routines. We're celebrating our daughter's milestones on our own terms, without the unsolicited advice, the backhanded compliments, or the desperate need to perform happiness for an audience that was only ever looking for flaws. We're learning what it means to be a real family. We're learning that love is not a transaction. We're learning that if you have to sacrifice your peace to keep someone in your life, you are paying a price that is far, far too high. If you're reading this and you feel like you're at the end of your rope, if you're dealing with toxic in-laws or a family dynamic that leaves you feeling small, broken, and gaslit, please know that you are not alone. You are not a bad person for wanting to protect your child, your marriage, and your own mental health. You are not a villain for setting a boundary that someone else refuses to respect. You are a human being, and you deserve to live a life that is free from the crushing weight of other people's toxic expectations. Our story is just one among thousands, but it's a story of reclamation. It's a story about how, when you finally draw the line, the world doesn't end. In fact, it's the moment the world actually begins to open up. The air gets clearer, the days get longer, and the love in your home becomes so much more intense because it's not being filtered through the lenses of judgment and manipulation. So, take this as your sign. If you've been waiting for permission to choose yourself, this is it. You have permission. You don't need to wait for a full bingo board. You don't need to wait for a major incident. You don't need to wait for them to change. You only need to realize that your peace is worth protecting and that the family you are building is the only family that truly matters. What's next for us? We're going to enjoy our baby. We're going to continue our therapy. We're going to keep building a home that smells like fresh coffee and laundry detergent. A home that is safe and warm and kind. We're going to raise our daughter to know what healthy boundaries look like, and she'll never have to wonder if she's enough, because we will have shown her every single day that she is everything. If this journey resonated with you, If you've ever had to build your own sanctuary out of the rubble of someone else's toxic expectations, leave a comment. Tell me about the boundaries you've set or the peace you've reclaimed. Let's support each other in this. And if you want to keep following along as we navigate this new, peaceful chapter of our lives, please subscribe. We're not hiding anymore, and we're not playing their game. We're living our own, and honestly, it's the best game in town. The struggle, the heartbreak, the frustration. It was all worth it to get to this moment of stillness. I'm proud of my husband. I'm proud of myself. And I am so, so grateful for this life we fought to keep. The stillness that has taken root in our home isn't just an absence of noise. It's the presence of peace. It's a texture, a feeling, like the soft, warm blanket I wrap around my daughter before she drifts off to sleep. For years, my husband David walked through life with his shoulders hunched, almost as if he were bracing for a blow that he knew was coming. Now, his posture is different. He walks through our living room with a lightness I haven't seen before. He's no longer the man who needs to keep his parents happy to be worthy of his own existence. He's simply a man who is happy to exist. We've had time now to sit with the invasion, to process it not as a tragedy but as a turning point. Sometimes I look at the baby's nursery, that room that was once a source of so much dread, where I felt like an intruder in my own home because of their criticisms, and I see it for what it is now, a sanctuary. I've redecorated slightly, nothing major, just small touches that make it feel like us. I added a soft plush rug that I know for a fact won't be ruined by accidental spills or constant judgmental inspections. I filled the bookshelves with stories I want to read to her, not the ones that were forced upon us. It's our room, in our house, and that is a victory that feels bigger than anything I could have imagined a few months ago. The fallout with the in-laws has gone quiet, and that silence is glorious. There are no more long, winding texts about how disappointed they are in us. There are no more attempts to guilt-trip David into giving them another chance. They've realised, finally, that the door isn't just closed, it's locked, deadbolted, and the key has been thrown away. They've moved on to their next target, I'm sure, and for that, I feel a strange sense of relief for whoever is unfortunate enough to be in their crosshairs next. But it's not our fight anymore. I've been reading through the thousands of comments from you all, and it's shifted my entire perspective. I realised that my story wasn't just about my husband or his parents. It was about the collective experience of everyone who has ever had to tell a toxic person no. It was about the thousands of women who were told they were doing it wrong when they were just doing their best. It was about the men who had to choose their own integrity over their own bloodline. When you stop feeling like you're the only one, the shame evaporates. And that shame? That was the only thing keeping them in power. I asked myself the other day, if I could go back to that morning before they arrived, knowing exactly how it would end, knowing about the bingo board, the hotel, the hurt, and the eventual silence, would I do it differently? And the answer, to my surprise, is no. I wouldn't change a thing. I wouldn't skip the invasion. Because if we hadn't been pushed that far, we might still be living in that grey area of tolerating toxicity. We might still be letting them take little, imperceptible bites out of our lives. We needed that explosion to clear the air. We needed the chaos to see the path to the order we have now. My husband is continuing his therapy, and he's doing things that used to be impossible for him. He's speaking his mind at work. He's saying no to people who don't respect his time. He's becoming his own person, not just a mirror reflecting back the expectations of his parents. And our daughter? She's growing up in a house where the only voices she hears are ones that encourage her, love her, and respect her. She will never know what it's like to be treated as an object in a competition. She will never have to learn how to walk on eggshells. She will be free. If you're still listening, if you're still wrestling with the demons of your own upbringing or the pressures of your current family dynamics, please remember this. You are the author of your own story. You aren't a character in their play. You are the one holding the pen. If you don't like the script, if you don't like the way they treat you, you have every right to cross out the lines and rewrite them. You have every right to close the book on chapters that are no longer serving you. I'm so grateful for this journey. I'm grateful for the bingo board that reminded us we were sane. I'm grateful for the hotel room that gave us our home back. And most of all, I'm grateful for the courage it took to choose a future that we actually wanted to live in. We're still here, we're still fighting for our peace, and every single day it gets just a little bit brighter. What about you? What are you going to do today to choose your own peace? Don't let another day go by feeling like you're trapped in a script you didn't write. Take the step, close the door, breathe the fresh, clean air of a life that is truly yours. It's yours to live, and it's yours to protect. We're closing this chapter now, stepping out into a future where the only thing that matters is the family we've built, not the ghosts we've left behind. Thank you for walking this path with us, for listening, and for validating that, yes, our boundaries were necessary, and yes, we are better for them. If you're ever in doubt, just remember, you are enough. You have always been enough, and that is the only truth that matters. We're at a point now where even the memory of that visit has lost its sharp, jagged edges. It feels like watching a movie of someone else's life, someone who was struggling, someone who was trapped, someone who didn't yet know that they had the power to change their own reality. I look at that bingo board sometimes, tucked away in the back of our office drawer, and instead of feeling that familiar, sickening rush of adrenaline, I just feel a quiet, steady sense of peace. It was a catalyst. It was the messy, brutal, necessary friction that started the fire of our independence. David has become someone I didn't even know he could be. I watch him play with our daughter, and I don't see the shadow of his childhood hovering over him anymore. He's not looking over his shoulder for his parents' approval. He's not waiting for the "you're doing it wrong" critique. He's just fully, unapologetically himself. And because he is, our daughter is growing up in an environment where her existence is celebrated, not analysed. She's learning that her boundaries, even the tiny, silent ones of a toddler, are respected. I've been thinking a lot about the word legacy. We're taught to think of legacy as money or houses or family names. But I realise now that our legacy is the emotional safety we've built for our children. It's the way we handle conflict, the way we set boundaries, and the way we prioritise our inner peace over the fragile egos of people who don't have our best interests at heart. We're passing down a different kind of inheritance, the freedom to say no without guilt, and the confidence to walk away from anything that makes us feel small. We still get the occasional ping on our phones, those vague, performative messages from relatives wondering if we've thought about patching things up. But we don't even need to discuss them anymore. David just deletes them. There's no debate, no hand-wringing, no, maybe we should just be nice for the holidays. We've realised that being nice isn't a virtue when it comes at the expense of your own mental health or your family's safety. We've redefined nice as being kind to the people who are kind to us and being fiercely protective of our own boundaries. I see so many people in the comments who are still in the thick of it. People who are trapped in that cycle of, I have to be polite, or they're family, I can't just cut them off. I want to tell every single one of you that you can. You are not a prisoner of your lineage. You are a sovereign individual. If your house doesn't feel like a home because of the people you've let in, you have the right to close that door. It's not cruel. It's not too sensitive. It's self-preservation. It's the highest form of love. Love for yourself and for the family you've chosen to protect. If I could leave you with one thing, it's this. Don't wait for the bingo board to be full. Don't wait for the breaking point. Don't wait until you're so exhausted that you don't recognize the person staring back at you in the mirror. Listen to the small voice, the one that tells you when something is wrong, the one that tells you when your home is being invaded, the one that tells you that you deserve better. That voice is your greatest ally. We're moving forward now, into a future that's ours alone. There are no more trips to plan for, no more hotel bills to worry about, no more must-visit relatives to appease. Just us, our growing daughter, and the beautiful, honest, and sometimes messy work of building a life that feels like home every single day. I want to thank you for listening, for sharing your stories, and for being part of this community of people who have chosen to break the cycle. You've helped me feel less alone, and I hope this story has done the same for you. Don't forget to subscribe, share your thoughts, and keep protecting your peace. Your story, your boundaries, and your life are worth it. We're still here, we're still standing, and we've never been more grateful for the quiet.